we're going to continue talking about fractions. Now we're going to be talking about adding or subtracting fractions. Adding or subtracting fractions. Very important, when I add or I subtract a fraction, in order to do it correctly, I must have a common denominator. In other words, both of the denominators, or all the denominators that are being added or subtracted, must be the same. If I already have common denominators, it is very simple. For example, if I have 3/5 plus 2/5, my denominators, remember denominator down, the bottom number of a fraction, if they're already the same, here they're both 5, my job is very easy. I simply add the numerators, 3 plus 2, and I leave the denominators the same. I do not add the denominators, I leave them the same. So the denominator would be 5, not 10. I do not add them, I leave it the same. Add the numerators, I have 5 over 5. Now that can be reduced. Any number over itself is equal to 1. So I reduce that or write that in the smallest, lowest terms, which is 1. If my denominators are different, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Let's say, for example, I have 3/7 plus 2/5. In this case, I have uncommon denominators that are unlike, so I have to write the denominators as common denominators. Now remember, our identity property of multiplication says as long as I multiply something by 1, I have the same number. So for example, if I multiply 8 times 1, my answer is still 8. This applies to fractions. If I have 2/3 times 2 over 2, which is equal to 1, results in 4 over 6. 4 over 6 is equal to 2/3 because I multiplied by 1. So I can change the denominators and leave the fraction the same as long as I do the same thing to the numerator. Now the question is, what denominator do I want to use? Common denominator. We use what we call the least common multiple. In order to determine the least common multiple, I write each denominator as a product of primes. I find the primes that occur the most, and I multiply them together. This makes it easy for us as both of these denominators are already prime. Therefore, I just multiply them together. So my common denominator is going to be 35. Now, anytime I change something on the bottom, I must do the same thing to the top in order to keep it equal. That is multiplying by 1 like I did here. So I multiplied 7 by 5 to get 35. That means I'm going to have to do the same thing to the top to keep it equal. 3 times 5 equals 15. Over here I multiplied 5 times 7 to get 35. I have to do the same thing to the top. 2 times 7 is 14. Now I have common denominators. Now remember, I add the numerators. 15 plus 14 is 29. I do not add the denominators. I leave them the same once they are common. My common denominator is 35. I cannot reduce that any farther. 29 is a prime number. 35 would be written as 7 and 5. That cannot be reduced. Therefore, my answer would be 29 over 35. If I have a number that is a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex, that can make it a little more complicated. So let's say, for example, I am adding two numbers. Find an example here for you. Let's say I am adding 3/15 and 4/9. So 3 over 15 plus 4 over 9. Now my first step is to find the least common multiple of the denominators. I do this by writing each one as a product of primes using my factor tree. 15, 5, and 3, 9, 3, and 3. So I have 3 and 5, 3 and 3. I choose whichever one has the most primes of each kind. This one has 1 3, this one has 2 3s. So I'm going to use 2 3s. This one has 1 5, this one has no 5, so I'm going to use the 5. I'm going to multiply those numbers together. 3 times 3 times 5, 9 times 5 is 45. So my common denominator is going to be 45. Now remember, if I change the denominator, I must change the numerator. I do that by multiplying by the same number. I multiplied 15 by 3 to get 45, so I must multiply the numerator by 3, which gives me 9. I multiply 9 by 5 to get 45, therefore I must multiply the numerator by 5, that gives me 20. Now I can add my numerators. 29. Remember, I leave my denominators the same. 45. I check to see if I can reduce. 29 is a prime number. It cannot be reduced. Therefore, this is my answer. So that is how you add fractions. Thank you.